Hey everyone, and thank you for being here for another one of these true crime deep dives. If you're new to the channel, welcome. As always, I want to remind you guys to watch responsibly. Today's video does involve descriptions of child abuse, neglect, sexual assault, homophobia, and that's just to name a few. So please keep in mind that there are some extremely distressing topics in this video. Please prioritize your mental well-being. So with that being said, today we're diving deep into the case of Takoda Collins. Takoda Collins came into this world on December 18th of 2008. He was born in the state of Wisconsin to his mother, Robin Collins, and to his father, Al-Mutahan McLean. And I really hope I did not butcher that name, and so that I avoid butchering it throughout this video, I'm going to refer to him as McLean. So Robin and McLean, they weren't really set up for success as teen parents. For example, McLean only had up to an 8th grade education. Born in 1989, McLean was only about 19 years old when Takota was born. And McLean actually had another child. He had had a son from a previous relationship before he had ever met Robin, and McLean had absolutely zero contact, no relationship with this child or his baby mama. So it seems like clearly that relationship did not work out, and the trajectory of Robin and McLean's relationship seemed to be, following down the same path. They never really had a stable relationship, even before Takota was born, and this dysfunction only got worse when Takota entered the picture. Allegedly, the abuse of Takota began within the first year of his life. According to Anita Bredesen, who claims to be a close friend of Robin's, she and her fiance took Takota into their home when he was a newborn. And they claimed that they did this because they were working close with Robin to adopt Takota. I found an interview with Anita where she makes it seem like she and Robin were great friends. The adoption arrangement, that custody arrangement they had going on, was completely amicable. The custody arrangement that she talks about, it seems so unconventional. And while I do hope that Takota was loved and cared for if and when he was in her custody, I've found conflicting reports that suggest that Takota's biological parents, Robin and McLean, had a lot more access to him during this time. Access that doesn't fully align with Takota being in the safe custody of another family, in the safe custody of Anita. In the same interview where she alleges that she's providing a safe space for him, she also alleges that there was an incident during the time that Takota was in her care where McLean came over for like a visitation, I guess, and ended up spanking Takota so badly, like infant, baby, newborn Takota. McLean spanked him so badly that Anita had to get CPS involved. So at this point in Takota's life, Anita Bredesen is the main source of information. She tells us that McLean was allegedly being investigated for harming Takota, but she never speaks ill of Robin. In the one interview that I found from Anita, she never says anything negative about her friend, and to me, in my opinion, this points to some bias and unreliability. It's possible that Anita had a rose-tinted view of Robin because we know that in 2009, Robin was criminally convicted of child abuse. So in Takota's first year of life, when he was supposedly in the safe custody of this Anita woman, his mom somehow has access to him, enough access to hurt him and then be investigated and charged for it. So Robin goes on to plead guilty to the child abuse. She pleads guilty, she's put on probation. So I guess my question for Anita would be, how can you say that Takota was in your safe custody if access to Takota's biological parents is causing him harm? At the very least, you need to report that, and it mandates professionally supervised visits. If this was overlooked by Anita, or if she chose to turn a blind eye to it in order to keep up her relationship with Robin, then I don't believe that Anita was ever the right person to care for baby Takota. And the interview that Anita gave WDTN news station will be included in the description of this video, but I want to say that the article that was written after this interview, it's really short. There's a lot of grammatical errors, so I'm hesitant to take it as a reliable source. I wanted to include her account because I think it gives us interesting insight into what went on in Takota's early life. We don't have a lot of other information on it, and it shows the priorities of the adults that were surrounding Takota, the adults that were entrusted to care for him. And I think it's despicable. Honestly, if Anita, if what you're saying is an accurate account, I think that you messed up. If you don't want to be on the list of people who failed this child, you probably shouldn't have come forward with your account. Let's say it wasn't true, you didn't have full custody of him. Why are you inserting yourself into this? And if you did have full custody with him and you overlooked everything like I said, then shame on you. Just 2 years after Robin's sentence, her probation was revoked for admitted drug use. So Robin came clean, said she was using drugs. Of course, that's violation of the terms of her probation. So she's sent to prison to serve out that full sentence. And meanwhile, since Anita has no legal claim to Takota, no actual legal custody agreement or adoption agreement was actually settled, so Takota was sent into the foster care system. Around this time in Takota's life, McLean was in and out of the picture, so I don't believe he was around to claim Takota when Robin went to prison. Please excuse the quick change. I had to come back and film this video at a later time. So picking up right where we left off, according to Anita again, she and her fiance were still trying to gain custody of Takota during his time in the foster care system. And we know from other reports that Takota's maternal grandmother was also trying to adopt him. Despite these other families having interest in adopting Takota, around 2012, McLean came back into the picture and decided that he wanted his son back. So pretty much after he took a DNA test, it was a done deal. He was able to regain custody of Takota. And I can understand this because McLean is Takota's biological father. At this point, he's the only parent who's not incarcerated. And during this time, he didn't have a criminal record yet. So there was really no reason for the state of Wisconsin to keep Takota from McLean. So father and son were reunited, for better or for worse, and of course it was for worse. I don't really even understand why McLean would have wanted custody of Takota, because he allegedly abused him since infancy, and there's no evidence that McLean ever really had any affection for Takota, so I have to wonder what his motives were in taking full custody of him. So now McLean and Takota are entering new territory. I don't believe McLean was really equipped to suddenly be a full-time guardian to a toddler, especially one that he was kind of unfamiliar with, because he hadn't really had a lot of contact with Takota in the last couple of years. In 2012, shortly after McLean takes custody of Takota, he's slapped with felony strangulation and misdemeanor battery charges. So from my understanding of this incident, McLean is assaulting a stranger. He accused this stranger of stealing his phone. So McLean goes ahead and resorts to punching this guy in the face. Even after his victim is unconscious, McLean is relentless. He goes on to steal his victim's phone. So it's a whole ordeal. I don't really even know what to make of it. There are so many ways to interpret that, but clearly McLean is in the wrong. He pleads guilty to these charges, and the felony charge is actually lessened to a misdemeanor, probably because, he made a deal and pled guilty. But so already, shortly after McLean is this new full-time guardian, he's establishing a criminal record for himself. And this would turn into a pattern of assault. Later in 2013, not long later, in another public place, McLean is seen by witnesses assaulting his on and off again girlfriend, Amanda Hines, with a freaking pipe. So allegedly, McLean had been hitting Amanda with this pipe, and he grabbed her by the hair and shoved her into a vehicle that later sped away from the scene, which left all of the witnesses very concerned for Amanda's safety. Of course, they call the cops and report the incident. Initially, McLean was slapped with criminal charges for this attack, but he was never indicted on those charges, and they were later dropped. The case was dismissed, and I'm inclined to think that this is because Amanda, the victim and McLean's girlfriend, she probably did not want to cooperate with the prosecution, which makes it very hard for them to build a case. It falls apart, it gets dismissed in court. That's obviously just my speculation, but in a lot of domestic assault cases, it can be very difficult for the prosecution to build a case if the victim isn't going to work with them. Yeah, that's my speculation on that. Clearly, McLean is violent, he's aggressive, he's escalating his forms of abuse. He's introducing weapons into his attacks, which we know those are all huge red flags. And from prison, Robin is getting updates about Takota. She knows that he's with McLean, and I'm imagining that she heard about McLean's run-ins with the law around this time. So in 2013, not long after McLean allegedly assaults Amanda with that pipe, Robin writes a letter from prison to the Wisconsin family courts requesting that they restrict McLean from leaving the state with Takota. I think Robin may have been concerned that McLean would commit some type of parental kidnapping, or maybe prevent her from seeing Takota once she got out of prison. In Robin's letter to the court, she alleged that McLean was actually being investigated for abusing Takota. I could not find any reports about this investigation, but that's what Robin told the courts. And we also know, McLean is going around assaulting people around this time, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that McLean was being investigated by some type of child protective services. We don't know. I want to address that some of us, understandably, might be having conflicting feelings towards Robin at this point. I know I had a lot of conflicting feelings towards her. So here she is sitting in prison for admittedly abusing Takota and using illicit drugs, and she's claiming to be worried about the very child that she abused. So it's giving mixed signals, but I do want to say that in some cases, not every case, but in some cases, rehabilitation is possible. And it doesn't seem like Robin, had a large or extensive criminal history. At least in my research, I couldn't find any public information citing that she had a criminal history besides this charge. So she wasn't a chronic offender. And without making excuses for her, it's possible that she was connected to some resources while she was in prison or during her probationary period. that could have helped her begin to reform her lifestyle and her parenting style. I don't know, but like at the very least, like that's what we could hope for. So without making passes for her or without making excuses for what Robin did, because it was awful and nobody should ever lay a finger on their child or harm their child in any way, it is still possible, without giving her a pass, that she still loved Takota and was concerned for his safety, especially if she, you know, knew McLean well. She can definitely still be worried about him. And that is about all the grace I will grant Robin. Moving forward, when Takota was about 4 years old, he's living with McLean, right? And McLean had moved Amanda in at this point, so it's the three of them living together. Robin, from prison, initiated legal action to keep Takota in the state of Wisconsin. But unbeknownst to Wisconsin courts, McLean, Amanda, and Takota had actually already up and moved from Wisconsin to Tennessee. I don't know if McLean was legally prevented, like, from actually leaving Wisconsin with Takota at this point. Nothing had been settled in court. I don't know if McLean was even required to notify the courts if he left at this point. But, you know, regardless, he and Takota were states away at this point. And it was actually Robin who informed the Wisconsin courts that the two of them weren't even in the state anymore. Despite this setback, Robin didn't want to give up. She continued to pursue legal action over Takota's custody because she's thinking, you know, eventually she's going to get out of prison and she wants to be reunited with Takota, at least have some custody of him. However, Robin's case in family court quickly fell apart because McLean was actually able to provide the Wisconsin family courts with a signed, legal, like notarized document containing Robin's signature that basically established an agreement between the two of them that McLean could take Takota wherever he wanted. And of course, you know, this is a legal document, the courts accepted it, and Robin's case falls apart. I mean, most lawyers would say, like, I mean, that's your signature, you gave him permission. And Robin alleges that she was coerced into signing this. She doesn't say that McLean forged her signature, but she says that somehow she was tricked into signing this. And she doesn't give us any more information other than that, so I guess we can take it with a grain of salt. Basically, once again, it's a done deal. McLean has full custody of Takota. The courts do at least grant Robin visitation a few times per year with Takota once she's released from prison. Takota, McLean, and Amanda didn't stay in Tennessee for long. Around 2015, they relocated from Tennessee to Ohio. In Ohio, the three lived at 1934 Kensington, right in the heart of Dayton. And Dayton's a modest suburb. It's very nice. It's kind of like a college town. I've been there a few times, but overall, there's supposed to be pretty good schools there. There's a lot of things to do, like especially with young kids. So Dayton could have been a fresh start for all three of them. Takota was supposed to be starting in a new school. He should have been blossoming at this time in his life and really coming into his own. But that's not what happened here. Things really just got worse for Takota in Dayton. And while they were there, the family was supported by like social services or welfare in their area. Amanda had started working the night shift at a local Walgreens, and I believe McLean was kind of like working odd jobs. So he didn't really have stable employment, but he was working at times. By all means, McLean and Amanda had every ability, every chance to be able to take care of Takota, yet they would do everything in their power to make Takota's life a living hell. And it's speculated that pretty much from the point when the family moved into 1934 Kensington, Takota was the target, like the sole target of severe physical and emotional abuse. McLean was impatient, violent, and antagonistic towards Takota. And this is disgusting. There's no excuse for it, because rather than teaching your small child, your like 5 or 6 year old child, how to manage and communicate their emotions, McLean resorts to beating him, you know, putting him through really intense physical endurance exercises. He humiliates him. There's no excuse for it. McLean just seems to be a sadist, in my opinion. Takota would be forced into these endurance poses by McLean, and McLean would demand that Takota hold these poses for hours at a time. And I mean, this is no joke. We've talked about like the captain chair in this on this channel before, which is like a wall sit with your arms out in front of you. I mean, there were times where McLean would, you know, make Takota go into the captain's chair, and then he would stack like heavy books on top of Takota's arms, making it even more difficult and putting a dangerous strain on Takota's body. Like, this is a child. Most of Takota's days, from the point that he was 6 years old onwards to the end of his life, he was made to just do these endurance exercises. And it not only pushed him to dangerous levels of exhaustion, but there would be no way physically that he would be able to actually hold those poses for as long as McLean demanded. And when inevitably Takota would fall or have to like readjust or just take a freaking break, McLean would beat the living hell out of Takota just because he like flinched a little bit. McLean would literally beat Takota until this poor child would go back into whatever position McLean had him in. And if, let's say McLean thought that Takota deserved an extra severe punishment, McLean would lock Takota in a dark closet, depriving him of food, water, clothing, and a bathroom. And like, again, this is something that we've seen on this channel before. What I don't know what it is that could lead a parent to resorting to this. It's just evil. It's evil. Yes, and my dog agrees, Bosco. It's evil. When Takota wasn't at school or sleeping for the very few hours that McLean allowed him to, he was in these endurance poses. Like, there was no rest for him. There wasn't any outside time or like friends over. Takota was not engaging in the normal activities for a child his age. His life was sleep, school, torture, repeat. In 2016, Amanda's cousin, Jennifer Ebert, came to live with the family. So court documents identify Jennifer Ebert as Amanda's cousin, but in Amanda's police interrogation, she refers to Jennifer as her sister. So clearly they have a close relationship, but I'm not exactly sure like what their biological connection is. I don't really even know if it matters. Jennifer was invited to come and stay with the family. I can't even call them a family because it's not what they were. But Jennifer was invited to come and live with them under the condition that she help take care of Takota, the family dogs, and like household chores. But Jennifer, I don't know if she took care of the dogs or the household chores, but I do know for a fact that she did not take care of Takota. And you would think that having an extra set of hands in the house, another adult in the house, would lessen the abuse of Takota. If anything, you'd think he'd be better taken care of. It was almost as if she just, she turned a blind eye to it. She later participated, but it just, you'd think that having that like extra assistance, Takota would be better taken care of, but absolutely not. McLean is not the first parent, certainly not the first parent that we've discussed on this channel who attempts to blur the lines between abuse and discipline. But there is certainly a point at which punishing a child can get out of hand and cross over into abusive territory. With all the parenting styles out there, obviously we know that some parents prefer to punish their children, like as a form of discipline, like to teach them. But okay, I don't want to sound condescending because like that is a parenting style, but there are healthy, reasonable ways to punish your child, and then there are abusive, damaging ways to punish your child. The Empowering Parents organization, which is run by industry experts in behavioral health, family psychology, and other fields, they highlight the differences between punishments and consequences in one of their articles, which I will have linked in the description. They like differentiate consequences and punishments by saying that consequences are directly correlated to the action or misbehavior committed by the child. So consequences, the whole point is to provide context for the kid. You want to be able to teach them how their negative actions impact themselves, the people around them, the world around them, and hopefully, like ideally, parenting through consequences results in a child having more agency and the better ability and more confidence to make the right choices. On the other hand, punishments, especially physical, borderline abusive punishments, they are significantly less effective at that type of developmental growth. When a child is spanked or made to engage in endurance exercises, they're not really learning how to avoid that bad behavior. They're not learning what they did wrong and how they could change it and do right in the future. Instead, they're learning about pain and anger and frustration and definitely resentment towards the caregiver or whoever's like enforcing the punishment. It's not the most effective way to ensure that children start to like understand right from wrong and choose right. We know that young children, especially children around Takota's age, need healthy outlets to be able to like explore their behavior, and it's normal for them to test the boundaries of their parents or their caregivers, their teachers. That's normal child behavior. And as adults, it is our responsibility to be patient and teach them without threatening them or causing them emotional harm or hurting them in any way. And like that like should go without saying. I shouldn't even have to say that. Even if McLean was actually trying to discipline Takota, his methods are statistically ineffective, and let's be real, he was not trying to discipline Takota because he wasn't trying to discipline Takota. He was abusing him. There's nothing that Takota could have done so wrong to deserve 14 hours of holding a book bag in the air, missing dinner, being deprived of sleep. There's nothing that any child could do that would warrant that as a punishment. That's straight up abuse. So McLean had a lot of various forms of abuse besides locking Takota in the closet or putting him through these endurance exercises. He also used hot sauce as a weapon, and let's just say that he wasn't putting the hot sauce in Takota's mouth. So McLean is a twisted individual, and you might be thinking, well, okay, McLean's doing all of this. There are two other people living in this house. How can he hide this from them? Well, McLean wasn't hiding this from Amanda or Jennifer. In fact, Amanda and Jennifer had their own special role. Amanda and Jennifer, two grown adults, acted as McLean's spies, his little minions. Basically, they monitored Takota's every move. So I told you he would have to be in these endurance poses for pretty much the entire day. And McLean would have to go out sometimes. Maybe he was working one of his jobs or just was out, and they would be Takota's guards. They would report back to McLean, giving him updates about Takota. And these are two grown women basically snitching on a child, knowing full well what's going to happen to Takota once McLean gets home. Amanda and Jennifer would even go so far as to take pictures of Takota during this abuse, they would take pictures of him on the family iPad and, you know, send these pictures through iMessage and Facebook. And we saw this also with Adrian Jones and like his stepmom Heather. Again, I have to wonder, I'm like, what could possess anybody to do that? I can't wrap my head around it. Despite having generous portions readily available for each meal, Takota was left emaciated. Jennifer, Amanda, and McLean basically gorged themselves on whatever the frick they wanted, and they basically watched and laughed at Takota as he stayed in this endurance exercise and watched these people eat while he was starving. At home, Takota had no safe space, no safe person, no one to look out for him, and he was enrolled in school, which was at least a brief escape, but McLean was determined to he wanted to take away even this small respite. It was not enough to torture Takota at home. He wanted his life to be miserable everywhere. Takota was enrolled at Horace Mann Elementary School in Dayton, and this should have been a really great place for him to like meet friends and have fun and just get away from his awful, awful home life. But McLean obviously wasn't going to have that. He would send Takota to school with the most horrendous haircuts. These would be haircuts that were ridiculous on purpose. McLean would cut his hair all jagged. Sometimes he would even cut Takota's head during these awful DIY haircuts. And then McLean would send Takota to school with the explicit purpose of humiliating him and alienating him from his classmates. Clearly, McLean wants Takota to be bullied and to feel insecure. And it's reported that Takota also came to school in soiled clothes, often smelling of urine and feces. Of course, his classmates, they're gonna be put off by this, you know? Takota shows up with these awful haircuts, covered in scrapes and bruises, smelling of who knows what. And just these elementary school kids were probably a bit frightened and confused. You know, they don't know exactly what's going on. And I mean, McLean's plan worked. He definitely alienated Takota from his peers, these people who he should have been able to make friends with. And the adults and the staff at Horace Mann Elementary, they also picked up on these clear signs of abuse and neglect. And according to court documents, they did make multiple calls to child welfare services. Of course, teachers are mandated reporters, so if they even suspect that a child is being harmed in some way, they are obligated by law to report that. And they initially tried to help by providing him with clean clothes. Some of the teachers actually tried to wash Takota's clothes for him when it became apparent that no one was washing them at home. McLean found out that the staff at Horace Mann Elementary was trying to provide Takota with clean clothes. He called the school completely irate and basically forbade them from doing so. He allegedly told a school staff member that Takota came to school in those soiled clothes, he's gonna stay in them. Like, it's his punishment for being such a disgusting child. Ugh. And that should have sent off the biggest red flags, because what the heck? And it kind of reminds me of the Ruby Frank situation where her daughter forgot her lunch and Ruby was like, oh, I hope nobody provides her with food because she needs to be taught a lesson. McLean was stating to school officials that he wanted Takota to remain in soiled clothing purely as a punishment for just being gross. That's clearly abusive behavior. That's emotionally damaging for Takota. I really do hope that they were diligent and these faculty members and the teachers were documenting all of this. We know that they made over I think it was like over a dozen calls to child welfare services on behalf of Takota. But we also have to keep in mind, because these things take time, when these mandated reporters are calling, nothing is going to happen instantaneously. And I'm sure these teachers, as much as we might think, like, why wouldn't someone have just like stepped in and taken drastic actions? I want to believe that these teachers were trying to do their jobs. They probably felt like they were reporting to the proper authorities and that those authorities would handle the situation properly. And we also have to keep in mind that after teachers make these types of reports against parents, they kind of have to tread lightly, because it's gonna get back to the parents that, CPS was called. They're gonna show up and do an investigation, or at least question them. So the teachers have to be sure not to overstep too much and intervene too much, because this could result in the abuse getting worse for Takota at home, or it could even result in McLean pulling Takota out of school, and then they would have no eyes on him, no way to be able to ensure his safety. So I do see how these teachers were in a really difficult situation. And of course, like all of us, we can sit here, hindsight's 2020, and be like, by whatever means necessary, get Takota away from that man. I get that. I would want to do that too. But unfortunately, in the real world, that's not how these things play out. These teachers likely thought that they were doing the right thing. At one point, McLean called the school again, I guess because he had been contacted by Child Protective Services. He called the school and demanded that the nurse in the elementary school refuse to see Takota. Like, he didn't want Takota having any contact with the school nurse. And I guess because of legal reasons, the school had to comply to this unreasonable demand. Even Robin, all the way in the state of Wisconsin, was calling Dayton Child Welfare Services, reporting her fears. Dayton DCFS did conduct a home visit to go and see what was going on. They paid a visit to 1934 Kensington, specifically to speak with Takota. But with Takota being a minor, without the parent or guardian's permission, they weren't allowed to just take Takota and speak to him one-on-one. Instead, these social workers spoke to the family as a whole. McLean, Amanda, and I imagine Jennifer were all there with Takota, and of course, when a victim has their abusers looming over them, it's very unlikely that they feel safe enough to disclose the truth about their abuse. And I can't help but think that this is probably the case for Takota, because when the social workers asked him if he was okay, what was going on, Takota said he was fine, like he was well cared for. And it comes out later in court documents, well, I think it might be in one of the police investigations, but it comes out that McLean and Amanda knew that this home visit was going to take place, so they coached Takota on what to say, which again, we see all the time. So I really think if you're getting calls, this many calls about a child being abused, social workers should be able to interview that child without the accused abuser watching over them like a freaking hawk during the conversation between the social workers and McLean, because really Takota was hardly involved in the conversation. McLean tried to make it out like the faculty at Horace Mann Elementary had a vendetta against him. He was saying that they were like overstepping and making things up because he held them to higher standards than they could achieve. Like, it's just all just like complete BS. And on top of that, in his interview with these mandated reporters, these social workers, he's depicting Takota to be this like savage of a child, completely unruly, hard to manage. And it's just, this should have been like such a red flag for these social workers, and I'm hoping that it was, but really nothing became of this visit. In fact, once the visit was over, all these social workers did was offer McLean and Amanda some government resources for Takoda's medical attention and maybe psychological treatment. And of course, McLean refuses this help. And the social workers leave, basically telling McLean like, okay, well, here's our card, call us back for the follow-up so that we can schedule it when it works for you. Have a nice day. And they're off on their merry way. And I feel like this is a no-brainer. When you have a parent who's being accused of harming their child, multiple adults in this house who are being accused of harming a child, and you show up and you feel like it's necessary to provide them with resources, and they refuse those resources in front of you, why would you leave it to those parents to schedule the follow-up? Those social workers should have scheduled it for him to ensure that they didn't lose contact with McLean. And also, like, they had eyes on Takota. Even if they didn't get to talk to Takota one-on-one, they saw him. They saw how malnourished he was, how skinny he was. They likely saw that he had bruises and that crazy haircut that McLean was giving him. And with McLean outright refusing their resources, I feel like he's committing, at the very least, medical neglect right in front of them. So I can't understand why they didn't recognize the severity of Takoda's case. And of course, McLean is not going to call these social workers back and schedule a visit. He's not going to have them into his home again. In fact, he pulls Takota out of Horace Mann Elementary School because, from McLean's perspective, like, they're the ones who are making these calls. They're the ones who are recognizing that Takota's being abused. So one of these days I'll be able to film a video without interruptions in one day, but with 3 animals and one of them being a 9-month-old puppy, who knows when that day will be. So jumping right back into where we left off, this home visit for McLean, it confirmed his belief that it was the faculty at Horace Mann Elementary School that were the ones who were making these reports. And they were. He wasn't wrong. But for this reason, he decided to pull Takota out of school. McLean wanted to put an end to all of the DCFS reports, all of the drama that came with people noticing the abuse that he inflicted on his son. At the end of the 2018 school year, Amanda called Horace Mann Elementary and let them know that Takota would not be returning for the next school year. They planned on homeschooling him, but we have seen how this can be a very easy, convenient excuse for parents who wish to isolate and abuse their children. I mean, we've been around the block. We've talked about enough child mortalities on this channel to know that removing children from school and other public environments under the guise of homeschooling, that's a huge risk factor in the pattern of domestic abuse. And it's disturbing to see that this happened once again to Takoda Collins. When a child leave school, when they're sheltered from their community, it's easier for their abusers to inflict whatever kind of pain and torture that they have in mind. There are less people around to witness the abuse, and as a result, there are less questions asked. So the abusers have more privacy. And the more isolated an abused child is, the more an abuser can reinforce the belief that the abused child is helpless and powerless. When McLean and Amanda took Takota out of school in 2018, they also took him out of his room. McLean and Amanda would have you believe that they took Takota's room away for practical purposes. McLean had recently become the full-time guardian of his own 3-year-old brother. So this would have been Takota's uncle, his paternal uncle. Obviously, because of this child's age, their identity is sealed, but court documents refer to them as NJ, so I will refer to them as NJ. So McLean stated that because 3-year-old NJ came into the house, he gave this child Takoda's room. And Takota really didn't even have a lot of furnishings in this room. He had a mattress, a few like pieces of bedding, like maybe a blanket. But when NJ took over this room, Takota was sent to the attic. He wasn't allowed to bring any of that up to the attic with him. That was all given to NJ when he came to live with them. And I think it's worth stating that court documents are very clear about how McLean treated his little brother, NJ, in comparison to Takota, his own son. Court documents are explicit that NJ was in perfect health. He had toys in his room. He even had books. He was well clothed. He wasn't malnourished at all. So clearly the 3 adults in this home knew how to take care of a child, at least to some extent. And I feel like this really plays into, it's really applicable to the criminal mindset, to the mens rea in this case. They were dead set on abusing Takota. He was the scapegoat. They inflicted this abuse on purpose. And there's no question, there's no doubt about that. When Takota was sent to the attic at 1934 Kensington, and this was not like a finished attic, it wasn't any place that any child should be residing in. Maybe you could use it for storage, but basically if you stepped anywhere that wasn't like a full support beam, you risked falling through the ceiling, like into the main level of the house. Beyond the obvious safety concerns of Takota living in this attic, he was also breathing in the dust and debris. And on days when the adults in the home either forgot or refused to let Takota outside of the attic, he was forced to urinate and defecate up there. So he's living in his own excrement at this point. McLean, Amanda, and Jennifer were well aware of this. In fact, they were disgusted by it. They didn't want to have to go up into the attic to make sure that Takota was in his designated endurance poses. So in order to spare themselves the experience of going up into the attic, they set up a live stream camera. So there was a camera in the attic pointed at Takota, and it was wired through the house and like hooked up to display the image of Takota in the attic on the living room TV. And they had this live stream going 24/7. And I guess it was the group's favorite pastime to just sit and watch Takota in these endurance poses, because I don't know how they made time to do anything else. They monitored him, they watched him every time he moved. They went up to the attic to beat him. At this point for Takota, who's not even being fed, muscle spasms would be pretty frequent. Like he would not be able to hold these poses for an extended period of time, yet they expected him to, and they would beat him if he would not comply. I truly cannot imagine what life was like at 1934 Kensington. It's unimaginable. Somehow, though, Takota living in this attic, he still had a fight inside him, a primal instinct to survive. At this point, the adults in the house had barricaded the attic door so that Takota wouldn't be able to leave on his own. And the only exit in the attic was a small window at the far corner, and it was likely just for ventilation purposes. It was no bigger than a tissue box or like a loaf of bread. It certainly was not large enough for an average 10-year-old child to fit through. But somehow in November of 2018, Takota was forced through this window and he fell 2 stories, landing on the front lawn of 1934 Kensington. And this was a big deal. Obviously, Takota was severely injured. He needed to be rushed to the hospital, and he was treated at the Dayton Children's Hospital for injuries that were consistent with falling from a 2nd or 3rd story window. And McLean and Amanda accompanied Takota to the hospital. Similar to the home visit with social services, Amanda and McLean never left Takota's side when he was being treated for his injuries, and the staff at the Children's Hospital recognized that this was pretty serious. This didn't just happen from a mischievous young boy playing around and getting into trouble. These were serious injuries. Takota had glass in his skin. And of course, the medical staff look at McLean and Amanda and they're like, what the heck happened? How did this occur? And McLean and Amanda play dumb. They spin the narrative that Takota is just an unruly child who probably, made his way up to the roof or up to the attic, and that's how this happened. The medical staff found their report to be suspicious, so they contact the police. The police show up to the hospital where Takota is being treated, and they question Amanda and McLean, but they give the police the same story that they gave the medical staff. They make it out to be Takota's fault, and I really don't understand how they got away with this, because even if your child did climb up to the roof or somehow get into the attic and force themselves out of a window, that's at like the very least neglect. How did it get to that point where they were able to do that type of thing? And maybe I don't feel like I'm being judgmental in this scenario. I don't understand how McLean and Amanda were able to leave the hospital with Takota, but they were. They were able to take Takota all stitched up and bring him right back to the house where they were keeping him captive. There were so many opportunities for social workers, police to intervene, and yet Takota still met the fate that he did. Upon Takota's return from the Children's Hospital, he's sent right back up into the attic. They have their barricaded, rigged doorway so that Takota cannot escape, and they also board up the window. So they actually created a makeshift wall in the attic. So they had boarded up the window, but they also created a makeshift wall in the attic so Takota wouldn't even be able to approach the boarded up window. They really did all they could to make sure that Takota was trapped in there and had absolutely no escape. The attic environment became so disgusting and uninhabitable that it began to affect the other levels of the house. So the adults in the house, McLean, Amanda, and Jennifer, were forced to let Takota down from the attic every once in a while to at least let him use the restroom and bathe himself, kind of like wash himself off. And the few times that Takota was let down from the attic to use the bathroom, he was beaten for displaying his poor hygiene and nudity in front of NJ. McLean, Amanda, and Jennifer would taunt Takota, calling him homophobic slurs and feminine names. They not only suggested that Takota was a homosexual, but they also accused him of trying to show off his body in front of 3-year-old NJ. Even though the reality was these 3 sick, perverted adults were the ones who were creating this situation. They were the ones who were depriving Takota of clothing. They were the ones who were making him soil himself in the attic. This was all their doing. They wanted Takota to believe that he was the monster when really they were the monsters. And once again, I cannot imagine the reality of this household. I cannot imagine what it was like for Takota. In an attempt to spare NJ from the sight and smell of poor Takota, the adults in the home enforced a new rule that Takota would only be allowed to leave the attic under the cover of darkness. So only when NJ was asleep in the dead of night would Takota be allowed to come down from the attic to bathe himself or use the restroom. And this task, this chore, was left up to Jennifer. Jennifer actually slept on the couch in the living room, which is actually where the live stream of Takota's attic was playing on the television. So Jennifer had a 24/7 view of what was going on in the attic, and it was left up to her to take Takota down, let him use the bathroom in the dead of night, and Jennifer wasn't always responsible enough to do this. Being unable to use the bathroom for days at a time, Takota had no choice but to constantly relieve himself in the attic, and this of course began to trickle down to other levels of the house, and it got to the point where the mess, it couldn't be avoided. And there was one day where McLean came home, and apparently the mess in the attic, the smell, it just became too much for McLean. He charged up to the attic in a complete rage and began to beat Takota because of the mess he made, when really, I mean, it's the mess McLean made, let's be real. So McLean goes ahead and beats Takota like he often has before, but this time he demands that Takota cleans up after himself. But as we've already established, Takota does not have any personal belongings, no possessions. He doesn't even have a blanket up there. So he definitely doesn't have cleaning supplies. I'm not sure what McLean expected when he said clean up this mess, but he inflicts this beating on Takota. And McLean retreats from the attic. He goes down to the main level of the house. He grabs a pair of kitchen gloves, like those type of reusable, probably yellow rubber gloves. He puts them on. He goes back up to the attic, and with his gloved hand, he scooped up the feces from the attic floor and he held it out to Takota, and he demanded that Takota eat his own feces. And of course, Takota refuses, as we all would. Court documents tell us that when Takota refused to eat his own feces, McLean pinned him down and forced it into his mouth. So he forced Takota to eat his own feces. And guys, I thought about censoring this. It's awful to talk about. It gave me nightmares. And while I would love to spare Takota, I don't want to cause any more harm to Takota's loved ones. I decided to include these details to display what a monster McLean is. All of these actions reflect on McLean. I know that these are morbid details, and I warned you guys at the beginning, and this next part as well, I struggle to talk about, but after this incident where McLean forced Takota to do this, McLean made it very clear to Takota that Takota was expected to clean up his own messes. He made it clear that McLean was basically forcing this 9-year-old to clean up after himself by eating his own feces. I'm just gonna say it real quick to just get through it. Takota, from this point on, from this incident on, was never fed another meal. He was basically trained, taught, conditioned to eat his own feces because he knew that if he didn't, and if the mess got too out of hand, somebody would come up and beat him. So Takota's options in life at this point were eat your own excrement or be tortured. And even if he complied with all of these sick demands, even if he complied and did everything that they said, he was still gonna be beat and tortured. And it's the level of humiliation and psychological and physical abuse and torture inflicted upon a child is so unfathomable. I honestly can say without a doubt there is no justice that exists in the US justice system that will actually give McLean what he deserves, because it just gets worse. So I've warned you, if you guys need to stop watching this video, I get it. This is my 3rd time recording. What was going through his mind? What was Takota thinking when he was in that attic for over a year? As a grown woman, I would shut down. I have a hard time even talking about this case. I can't imagine this poor child living through it. And those grown women, Amanda and Jennifer who slept on the couch and watched the live stream of Takota in the attic. They all knew, every adult in that house, McLean, Amanda, Jennifer, they all knew what the end result was going to be. They had stopped feeding Takota. He hadn't been out of the house in a year. He hadn't seen a doctor. He hadn't been to school. He didn't have any clothes. Takota didn't have any clothes. They had thrown away all of his clothes at this point. They were not planning for a future with Takota in it. They knew what was going to happen. This points to the criminal mindset that they all had. They knew what was going to happen to Takota when they inflicted this abuse. They knew what the end result was going to be. They knew he was going to die. Now we have reached the point in Takota's life, in the timeline of this crime, where we're approaching Takota's final days, his final hours. On December 12th of 2019, just days before Takota's 11th birthday, McLean came home to the house on Kensington. He was drunk, he was angry, and he was feeling particularly violent. And this was all very apparent to Amanda and Jennifer, who were home. They recognized this mood. It was something they had seen before, but they weren't worried or concerned because they knew that they were not going to be the target of McLean's rage. They knew that was reserved for Takota. So of course, when McLean came home that night on December 12th, he went right up to the attic without hesitation. McLean began beating Takota, and Amanda and Jennifer took their designated spots on the couch. They watched from the TV. Takota's screams and this violent attack was nothing out of the ordinary. It was a normal evening at 1934 Kensington. In Jennifer's police interrogation, she even says that, she dozed off on the couch and she woke up every now and then, as you do when you fall asleep on the couch in front of the television, but she wasn't waking up to infomercials. She was waking up to the images of McLean punching Takota in the stomach, and at this point, Takota's limp. Takota wasn't moving. The morning of December 13th brought a cold reality to that house and to all of Dayton. Court documents tell us that Jennifer woke up before the sun rose. She wanted to get Takota out of the attic and into the bathroom before NJ woke up. But on this particular morning, she had trouble stirring Takota. He wasn't responding when she called him, and when Takota emerged from the attic, he was stumbling. He could barely hold himself up, let alone bathe himself or use the restroom. And I don't know if Jennifer was too dumb to realize that he needed immediate medical attention, or if she just didn't care, and I'm inclined to believe she just didn't care because this had been going on for so long. But when Takota couldn't get himself to the bathroom, she went to wake up McLean and Amanda, and they came out and they saw Takota and they tried to elbow him. They were like shoving him around, trying to get him to wake up or respond, and when he didn't, they just decided to force him back up into the attic. McLean returned to the attic a few hours later, and at this point in the morning, Takota was still unresponsive. He had likely suffered internal bleeding or a traumatic brain injury from the night before. And at this point in the attic, there was a folding chair and some tarp. And these two items were not always there, but they were there on the morning of December 13th. And when McLean went into the attic, he began screaming at Takota to fold up the tarp and put away the folding chair. But of course, Takota is unresponsive. He can't even move. So he's unable to comply with this request. And as a result, McLean decides to start kicking Takota. Takota is lying motionless on his stomach on the attic floor. And at this point, McLean decides to stand on top of Takota and use the full force of his body, pushing up against the attic beams and forcing himself down on Takota, basically crushing him. Takota was limp. He was not responding to McLean's assault. So McLean decided to go back down to the main level. He retrieved the hot sauce that he used as a weapon. He went back up to the attic and poured this hot sauce on Takota, and Takota still wasn't conscious at this point. He was lying motionless, and so this was making McLean even more enraged. And as he was assaulting Takota with this hot sauce, I guess McLean stained his clothing with the hot sauce, which just made him even more upset. So he he took Takota from the attic down into one of the family's bathrooms, and he began filling the bathtub with water. He submerged Takota in the tub, so he forced his head under the water, and this is when Takota began thrashing. He regained consciousness to some extent. I mean, that's like human nature when you're being drowned. He tried to fight back, and he tried to fight for his life against McLean. McLean took Takota back up into the attic at this point, and he used the folding chair that was in the attic to beat Takota. So McLean started hitting Takota with this folding chair. He hit Takota so many times that this chair broke into pieces, and McLean took the broken arm of this folding chair and inserted it into Takota repeatedly. So McLean is assaulting his son with a broken chair, and his girlfriend Amanda and her cousin, sister, whatever, they're watching from the living room as this is going on, and they know exactly what's happening. Nobody intervened. Nobody called the police. Instead, they allowed him to die in that attic at the hands of his father, who was violating him in the worst possible way. And I guess when McLean felt satisfied, he left the attic and went about his day, and so did those women. They went about their day. And by that evening, when they realized that he was probably dead, somebody went to check on him and realized that Takota had stopped breathing. He had passed away. He had been murdered. And this was the point in which these adults decided that they needed to take action. Amanda and Jennifer took NJ, they packed him up in the car, and they left 1934 Kensington. McLean stayed behind and called 911 to report that Takota was unresponsive. And the 911 call that McLean makes is very upsetting. It's long. There's a lot of pauses and a lot of repetition, so I'm going to do my best to summarize it for you. McLean overall seems very unconcerned. He's very matter of fact. He's very short and impatient with the dispatcher who's trying to help him. So this dispatcher is trying to just get information about if Takota is breathing, what his birthday is, what his medical history is, and McLean is just telling the dispatcher how horrible Takota's breath is, and I wonder why it's horrible, McLean. I wonder who is forcing him to eat his own feces. Yeah, I wonder why. They ask McLean if Takota is breathing, and McLean, he basically just says his chest doesn't seem to be moving, so the 911 dispatchers tell him that he's probably going to have to do CPR. They first instruct him to make sure that Takota's airways are clear. So they say, can you look into his mouth and make sure that he didn't swallow something or accidentally take something that is blocking his airways and causing him to choke? And McLean responds by just gagging into the phone. He's just like gagging and moaning and basically saying, I don't know what this is. It smells rotten. He tells the 911 dispatcher, this boy, he likes to eat shit sometimes and lay in his pee all day. That's literally what he told the 911 dispatcher when they're trying to get him to perform CPR on his child. He starts providing all of this information about how Takota is a child who has a lot of mental issues and how he hurts himself all the time. Like, he's trying to paint this picture of Takota having self-injurious behaviors when we know that McLean is the one who is inflicting these injuries. The dispatcher is trying to give him directions on how to administer CPR. They're trying to assure him that help is on the way, paramedics are on the way, but McLean isn't even asking any of that. Eventually, the ambulance and the paramedics arrive, and so do the police. When the police make contact with McLean, he's actually still on the phone with the dispatchers for a little bit, and McLean immediately starts ranting to the police about how Takota has probably hurt himself. Before the police really even have a moment to just establish what they're walking into, McLean's already asking the paramedics if he's dead. McLean can actually be heard on police body cam saying, "All right, I tried to get you guys here as fast as I could." He's trying to absolve himself of any responsibility, but it is very apparent to everyone on the scene that this is no accident and this is nothing that a child could inflict upon themselves. They took McLean into custody and Takota was rushed to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. Amanda was quick to reunite with McLean at the police station, where they were recorded on camera consoling each other. Amanda even told McLean what a good father he was and how he was such a great person, and that if Takota was alive, he would totally vouch for him. So yeah. When later interrogated by police, McLean stuck to the narrative that Takota's injuries, included those to his rectum, were self-inflicted. He tried to tell the police that the morning started out with Takota screaming for help from the attic, and McLean, being the good father that he is, ran up to help his son, only to see Takota with a broken chair leg in his rectum. And McLean did his very best to emphasize with police that this type of behavior was typical for Takota, and he also made it very clear that he himself was not a homosexual. So doth protest too much, I think, McLean. McLean had plenty to say. During his police interview, he was jumping from topic to topic. It was like word vomit. The interrogator hardly had to interrogate him because McLean was talking so much, offering up so much bullshit, and McLean was constantly looking for reassurance from the female detective. McLean told the police interrogators that on the night of the 12th, Takota had been intentionally acting out. McLean told them that Takota was having accidents around the house and then proceeding to eat his own excrement and then throwing himself off of the banisters, so like throwing himself down the stairs. McLean told the police that he did his best to restrain Takota and provide him with food and water, but he also said that Takota straight up refused this. McLean is talking so much in his police interrogations that he's giving himself away, which is good for the investigators, good for us. It just goes to show how far an 8th grade education will take you. McLean tried in vain to present himself as a capable, caring father, but at every opportunity he was contradicting himself. For instance, McLean told the investigators that Takota had a history of abnormal stomach issues. He told them that he took him to the doctor and nobody could figure out why he always had these stomach issues. It was so crazy. But then he also would say in the next sentence that Takota ate his own feces. He refused to eat anything but feces. Which, I mean, that on its own, like, you would probably tell the doctor. And if you told the doctor that, it wouldn't be such a mystery why he's having these stomach issues. And let's say you didn't take him to the doctor and you still knew that he was eating this. The stomach issues are not a mystery. You're not fooling anybody. McLean is so idiotic that he really thinks he can spin a narrative that's going to make somebody believe that, oh yeah, I witnessed my child eating poop, and yet I'm really confused about why they might have stomach issues. Obviously, the investigators are not buying into this. No one could. It just does not add up. They knew early on, before an autopsy, before any of that, they knew from the hospital that Takoda's air passages were clogged with feces. He told the police that Takota would refuse to eat regular food, that he would only eat his own excrement. And McLean, when they asked McLean, what was your reaction to this? McLean responded by saying, I would be like, all right, at this point, there's nothing I can do. I mean, there's a lot that you could do. You could take your child to the doctor. You could accept the psychological resources that CPS is offering you. There's a lot you could do, McLean. There's a lot you could do. He also made a statement about Takota being unable to have blankets or clothing. And when the police asked, like, why wouldn't he be able to have these basic necessities? McLean told them it was because Takota would soil himself. He would soil the blankets, and it was just so unsanitary that he couldn't be trusted to have any type of bedding, which is just another attempt to paint Takota as a terrible monster when really it's McLean who's the sick monster. And this is not lost on law enforcement. They're just letting him talk and talk and talk and give them everything that they need. McLean claimed that he, Jennifer, Amanda, and NJ were all traumatized by Takota. Let's be real, Takota was the one who was living in constant fear. When the investigators asked McLean about the state of the house, he once again blamed these conditions on Takota. The living conditions were completely unsanitary, and the only room that seemed somewhat inhabitable was NJ's. Aside from the conditions of the attic, the main level, which Takota didn't even have access to, was in complete disarray. I mean, this was hoarders level disgusting. There was garbage everywhere, there was animal excrement, and when the police asked about this, somehow McLean thought it was logical to blame this on Takota. McLean's demeanor throughout all of these interrogation videos, he's pretty calm. He's doing his best to defend himself, but overall he's lax, he's casual, and the officers asked McLean to provide medical records. They wanted to get in contact with the doctors that McLean had claimed Takota had seen, but of course McLean could not provide these records because he wasn't taking Takota to the doctor. And when he told the investigators that Takota didn't actually have a doctor, he didn't have a primary care physician, the police officers were like, well, you said that because of all of these issues, all of these conditions, you were seeking constant medical attention. And then McLean would respond by saying, oh no, I mean, it wasn't serious enough for us to like take him to the ER. It's like every other sentence is contradicting. It's so infuriating. McLean is arrested, so are Amanda and Jennifer, and NJ is taken into protective custody. All three were charged with child abuse, and of course, McLean was also charged with a lot more serious crimes that became apparent after Takota's autopsy was complete. I'm not going to review all of the details of Takota's autopsy. You can research that for yourself, but once the autopsy did come back, there was enough evidence to prosecute McLean, Amanda, and Jennifer. McLean was ultimately charged and found guilty for 3 counts of endangering the welfare of a child, 1 count of kidnapping, 1 count of rape, and 1 count of murder. He will be serving 50 years to life at the Montgomery County Prison in Ohio. Amanda Hines was charged and found guilty of 2 counts of endangering the welfare of a child and 1 count of involuntary manslaughter. She was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Jennifer Ebert was convicted of 1 count of endangering the welfare of a child and 1 count of manslaughter, and she was sentenced to 8 to 12 years in prison. I don't believe there is any sentence that exists in our justice system that would truly provide justice in this case. Life in prison doesn't come close, and Jennifer being sentenced to 8 to 12 years it doesn't sit right with me. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about these sentences. I personally feel disgusted. I don't think that these people should ever see the light of day, considering what they did to Takota. Takota did not get to see the light of day. In fact, they boarded up the only window that would have provided him light. So I don't feel like there's a lot of closure in this case. I think that Takota's life was lost, and there are 3 people who are still living. Whether or not they have their freedoms revoked, they are still living, breathing, eating, sleeping, and enjoying a lot of the luxuries that Takota wasn't afforded. Takota didn't get to eat. He barely got to sleep. He wasn't allowed to go outside, even if it was for an hour or 2 a day. I don't have a positive conclusion to this video. So I just want to end this with a moment of reflection for Takota. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to provide a lot of details in this video about who Takota was. I don't know if those details exist. I certainly did not find them in my research. At the very least, we can try to learn something from his story. I hope that we can keep Takota in our hearts as we move forward and be reminded to walk through this world with empathy and love instead of egocentrism and violence. That's all I have for today's video. I wish I could say more. I wish I could honor Takota in a way that was more than just some trivial YouTube video, but I don't know what to do with this case. I don't know what to do with this one. This one really hurts. But I hope anybody out there who is watching this video stays safe. I don't know, I just wish you well. I wish you well. I'm out. Goodbye. I will see you in the next video.